You heard a few things, a few snippets from what Esther thinks we should be talking about. But what we hope the next 3 days will be about is talking about what works and what doesn't and how, right? So on that note, as we wait for our official moderator of the session, who will join us, like a lot of things, life does catch up sometimes. So I'm your fill-in moderator for now. We will start with a round of introductions, and rather than me doing it, I will hand this over to our very, very able panelists for today to tell you who they are, where they come from, and why they're here today. So Sarah, may I hand the microphone over to you, please, to start the introductions. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Sucharita. Very happy to be here. It's an extremely relevant topic. That's something that we've been debating, discussing internally and externally. So just to give you a quick overview, my name is Sara Munir. I'm the CEO for Invest to Innovate, which is an entrepreneurship support organization based out of Pakistan with a sister entity that's also Pakistan's first female-led venture fund. We work with startups and SMEs and SGBs through various stages of their life cycle. We support them through capacity building, research, connecting them to capital, and then also advocating on the policy side of things. So climate entrepreneurship is something that we've been contemplating and working with marginally over the past year, because that's realistically when we've started to see a pipeline coming out of Pakistan of sustainability ventures. And very happy to be here and learn more from our local and regional peers as to how they're thinking about the space. Farwa, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you and ASMA Network for having us here today. And it's a pleasure to join this important conversation. I'll start with my introduction here. My name is Farwa Rashid Minhas. I work for an organization called the Asia Foundation, and the Asia Foundation has been working within the Asian countries from the last 6 decades, like 60 years or so. And within Pakistan, we have like an office that actually works on so many different thematic focuses. But across Asia, we have like 18 to 19 country offices that works, and we also have regional programming. And if I would say, it would be the intersection of environmental resilience, inclusive economic growth, innovation ecosystems. So we work on quite themes across Asia, and we do work together whenever it's needed, be it like environment resilience or economic growth, entrepreneurship, digital skills, women empowerment, so all of those areas interlink, and we have a lot of programming around that. And today we'll be talking a bit more about it. Thank you. I think Stanley.
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me. So I'm Stanley Ng from the New Energy Nexus. We're a global organization supporting energy and climate startups, operating in 15 countries now. So we're supporting on incubators, accelerators. We have started doing more financial innovation work. We have very small funds here and there, and now also figuring out how to do more of that systemic change work, working with government agencies and stuff to really unlock levers for entrepreneurs to be successful. So nice to meet you all. Yeah.
Kareem, you're last to go, and if you're able to turn your video on, that would be great.
Hi. Sorry, am I on already?
Yes, you are, with your introductions.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, thank you so much for having me. And my name is Karim, and I work for IPS, or Industrial Promotional Services, which is a division of EggFed, which is part of the AKDM network. So pleased to be here.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kareem. With that, Harris, I will hand it over to you as the official moderator for today. I will just say, I think this is amazing. As you can see, we have a really wide representation from across South Asia. I would encourage our participants, and I see a raised hand already, we'll come to you, our participants to really engage with the session today. Harris, with that, I will hand it over to you for introduction for yourself to set the context for this first session of the South Asia Convening 2025. Over to you.
Thanks, Sucharita. So, hi everyone, my name is Haris Khan and I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Accelerate Prosperity Pakistan. So just to elaborate a bit about Accelerate Prosperity, it is a global initiative of the Aga Khan Development Network in Central and South Asia, which offers creative financial solutions as well as pre- and post-investment technical assistance to help grow early-stage businesses, startups, and small-growing businesses. We are inspiring rising entrepreneurs in emerging regions to grow into new markets, create sustainable employment, promote innovation, and strengthen communities. When we talk about impact in Central and South Asia, AP has till date supported over 7,000 businesses with tailored technical assistance, invested in over 680 enterprises, hereby deploying over $17 million in catalytic capital. These investments were further able to leverage an additional $55 million from external sources, as well as help generate over 7,700 new full-time equivalent jobs. At the end of the day, our goal is simple: to help entrepreneurs succeed and become more investable so that their ventures continue to grow long after our time-bound support ends. It is exactly this kind of long-term resilience and innovation that sits at the heart of today's discussion. We're here to explore financing sustainable futures as part of green transition, an issue that's becoming more urgent by the day because South Asia is at a critical crossroads. The region is home to nearly 2 billion people, yet it loses an estimated $37 billion every year due to climate-related impacts. In 2016 alone, South Asia generated 334 million tons of waste, a number that's expected to double by 2050. Only 44% of this waste is formally collected, but a staggering 75% ends up in openly dumped. In comparison, Europe and Central Asia generated 392 million tons in waste in the same year. Nearly 3/4 of that waste was technically recoverable, but only 31% was actually recycled or composted. So for resource deficient and climate vulnerable economies like those in the South and Central Asia, circularity is not a policy luxury, it's an economic survival strategy. As the global demand for raw materials is projected to more than double by 2060, pressure on already scarce natural resources will intensify, a pressure our region simply cannot afford. Climate vulnerability adds even more urgency. Pakistan, for instance, is now ranked first in the Global Climate Risk Index 2025, which underscores the need for a rapid shift towards circular economy models and more sustainable practices. South Asia remains one of the world's fastest growing economic regions, but it contributes a little over 7% to global carbon dioxide emissions. The region is full of untapped opportunities for climate-smart investment, from renewable energy and transport, green buildings, urban wastewater management, municipal solid waste management, and climate-smart agriculture. And the demand is only growing. By 2030, projections show that over $3 trillion will be needed in climate-smart investments across the region. In light of these opportunities, as I represent AP on this platform, I want to emphasize that we implement a green growth framework, which is designed to support businesses, offering innovative climate-smart solutions that are not only profitable, but also sustainable and environmentally responsible. Using this framework, we help entrepreneurs support new opportunities, take bolder risks, and create real measurable change in their communities. Just to highlight, over 50% of AP's portfolios supported this year were either green or greening. But coming back to the challenge at hand, and with numbers like these on the table, it really makes you wonder, what is actually required to accelerate the scale of climate-smart investment in the region? On that note, I would like to welcome and introduce our esteemed panelists for today's sessions. I know everyone's just done the introductions, but I do it, and I'm going to do it from AP's end as well. So our first panelist, Farwa Rashid Minhas, is the Director of Programs at the Asia Foundation, Pakistan. She is a senior development professional holding over 17 years experience in leading governance, entrepreneurship, and innovation programs across Pakistan. As a certified ESG and impact investment expert, she leads efforts to advance climate resilience, women empowerment, and inclusive economic growth through innovation and regional partnerships. Our second panelist for the day, Kareem Sumar, is Director Strategic Partnerships for Industrial Promotion Services, or as we call it, IPS, and CEO of IPS Pakistan, driving strategic impact in energy, food systems, and enterprise development across Central and South Asia within the Aga Khan Development Network. He's an Australian business executive with over 30 years' experience in fuel and convenience retail. He serves in long-standing governance roles within AKDN, is trustee of the King's Trust Australia, and was appointed member of the Order of Australia in 2021. Our third panelist, Stanley Ng, is Global Partnership Director at New Energy Nexus, hereby contributing towards building energy and climate tech startups ecosystems in emerging markets. As a New York native with 18 years experience in renewables, clean tech, and digital innovation, he leads entrepreneurship in the clean energy transition. And our last panelist for the day, Sarah Munir, is CEO of Invest to Innovate and leverages over 15 years experience in media, technology, and entrepreneurship to drive startup growth. As a strategic storyteller and innovator, she is committed to creating impactful solutions and meaningful change. Now that we met all of our panelists, let's hear from them and explore the insights that they bring to this important discussion. So for all of the panelists, I'd like to ask, based on the unique mandates and influence of your organizations, you each play an important role in shaping the green transition. What key actions are you currently taking within your respective spheres? And how can these efforts be further scaled to drive greater collective impact in coming years? So before I move forward to hear the response of each panelist, I would just like to highlight, in order to address all the critical aspects of today's discussion, I'd appreciate if each panelist could limit the responses to 3 to 4 minutes. So to start off, Farwa, we would like to hear your response in this question first.
Thank you, Haris, and thank you so much for the kind introduction as well. As I stated before as well, the Asia Foundation has it's an honor to work within the Asian countries across. And we've been here working from the last 6 decades, and it's a lot of time to actually figure out a few things and continue to work on those things. And the good governance was the, I think, initial start. We started and then we kind of from the last decade or two, we started working on climate resilience, climate action, and all of that. But in Pakistan, I would say that our work kind of draws from both stream, the economic kind of empowerment for the women or the vulnerable communities, and also our main focus is on the youth, and that actually where our climate action and climate resilient works comes in. And this is something that we've been started exploring with the and we have been working with a lot of stakeholder across Asia as well, and that means networks, that means incubation centers, accelerators, and all of that. And I'd say that if you talk about kind of a focus that we are working on, is basically our work contributes to the green transitions in 2 to 3 ways. And it's climate smart entrepreneurship, but it has to have an integration towards women and youth groups, also some environmental resilience systems that actually happens on the regional level. It's not just country level. And then also the economic growth that integrates kind of sustainable practices and what we can work on. And within Pakistan, we have launched programs like Built by Her. It was a 5-year digital hackathon series. We're focused on women entrepreneurships and solutions and idea makers, and basically to generate a pipeline of new ideas and everything, and then further work on that. I go into details more that what we're currently focused on, but I think from right now, I think this is it, and I'd like to hear more about from our other panelists.
So before we move forward, I mean, it was very intriguing to hear your perspective based on your scope of work. So just in line with that, I have a follow-up question for you. So I would like to ask, given the scale of your organization across the Asia-Pacific region, what synergies or cross-country coordination mechanisms do you believe are important for enabling an effective and coherent green transition?
So this is very interesting because from the last year or so, and because of the diversing funding, kind of a situation within the Asian countries and everything, and we've been talking a lot about it because we need to re-strategize a lot of these synergies that needs to be in a place. However, I think the ideas are there, innovations are there, and I think the young people are almost ready to do all of that. However, when we talk about the capital, where they can work, where they can find the sandbox approaches, or it's mostly right now is on the credit kind of a thing. And I think we can work on impact investment and how that can actually translates when it's come to the Asian countries. So the kind of synergies that we are working kind of right now is impact catalyst funds and things like that we need to do. And also some of those some of the East Asian countries are kind of ahead of South Asian countries, so we can learn from that as well, what's working, what's not working, but also support our youth with kind of continuous but sustainable kind of funds as well. But it's like a very different kind of a bet that when it's come to South Asian countries, because you're talking about population, you're talking about other societal issues as well. So I think these kind of synergies we need to really learn from the countries, if they're a decade ahead, or they're pretty much on the same line.
Thank you for setting the stage so clearly, Parva. I'd now like to bring in Kareem. So, Kareem, given the dual mandate of IPS and Aga Khan Development Network to advance both commercial sustainability and social impact across the region footprint, so what key actions are you currently taking to drive the green transition? And how can these efforts be scaled to drive greater collective impact in the coming years?
First of all, Harris, thank you so much for inviting and for the question. Within IPS and the wider Archive Development Network, we actually treat the green transition as part of our core mandate. It's not a side project. Our discipline is commercial, but our purpose is development. So every investment has to work on both the fronts for us. At the moment, we are taking 3 sets of actions. First, we are deliberately tilting our portfolio towards climate-relevant sectors. In Pakistan and across our region that we work in, that means really clean and reliable energy, climate-resilient agriculture and food systems. And we're working around what I call basic infrastructure like water. We're looking at how every new investment either reduces emissions, strengthens resilience, or improves resource efficiency. Secondly, we are really hardwiring climate and social values into our investment process. Before committing capital, we're now asking very specific questions about climate risk, long-term community impact, and governance. These considerations sit alongside the financial model in our investment committees. Over time, that builds a very different kind of a portfolio. Thirdly, we're investing in a pipeline itself through our partnership. If I look at AP as an example, and other ecosystem players that we work closely, AP is really at that very, what I call early stages of founders who are climate conscious and have got climate conscious ideas, and helping us to really get that investment ready. And for IPS and other investors, it's really that strong floor, if I could call it, and understanding the impact and the basic governance. In terms of scale, there are really 2 levers from our perspective. One is to replicate what I would say proven models across our footprint. If a structure works for distribution of energy or climate smart agriculture in one geography, we can adapt and extend it to other countries. So if you look at the work we do in East Africa, or that we have done in Central Asia and South Asia, we really need to bring that partners and make it as a partnership moving forward. And the other one really touches on what I call the crowd in terms of capital behind these efforts. This means really blending structures and providing clear impact reporting so that the development partners and local financial institutions and private investors can come in alongside us in a way that matches their risk appetite. I think the green transition in our market will only scale if we can move from an isolated projects to a coordinated investment platforms. And that's probably how I see us really moving forward with this.
So that's a very interesting perspective, Kareem. And since you mentioned governance and AP as well, so just to build on that a bit, so given IPS is a key part of AP's governance structure, in your perspective, how do you see impact investors like AP contributing to the green transition for early stage ventures across South and Central Asia?
I think if I just look at AP and how AP has pivoted, just in, I've only been, as you know, in this part of the world for the last 18 months now. I've already seen AP in different countries, and I'm lucky enough that I actually sit on each of the AP committees around the geographies that we operate in. But if I look at Pakistan as an example, the way you guys have actually pivoted already into what you do from a climate perspective and helping those entrepreneurs actually make it as part of their DNA, I think is a really important piece. And that's what I can see happening. And if I look at another country where green is or climate is not as significantly as a forefront, they still have a longer way to catch up. And I think it's up to us as leaders to actually help each of these countries of South Asia in particular to actually move towards that domain, if I can call it that way.
Thank you for grounding us in that context, Kareem. So I'd now like to move on to our third panelist. So Stanley, same question for you. So what key actions are you currently taking within your respective sphere to drive the green transition? And how can these efforts be further scaled to drive greater collective impact?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for asking ours. So at New Energy Nexus, our mission is mainly to support entrepreneurs in the climate sector, right? Energy and climate. And our initial programs were running, our organization's 20 years old. First 10 years was a fund primarily in the US and California. And then the last 10 years was building out the accelerators across these 15 countries. We've run programs in South Asia, and Pakistan, India, Maldives, and then hope to do some work in Bangladesh next year. So we've started with accelerators supporting startups, working with universities, doing the earlier stage incubators. We actually just launched our first climate incubator in Pakistan last night. So I send you guys the link to that. Hopefully you guys can follow some of those companies. So after starting with supporting these early stage entrepreneurs, we realized, if the financing isn't happening, we need to enable them to get capital to build their businesses, right? If policy environments aren't ripe for renewable energy or for electric mobility, that's not going to take off either. So our scope of work has been expanding and growing and trying to be more systemic and tackling those bigger challenges. So, now we have a financial innovation scope of work, which Kareem was mentioning is so needed. We work across still doing the accelerators and programs supporting the entrepreneurs. And we also have a workforce development platform called New Energy Skills. We're doing both business and technical training for solar across in Pakistan, Philippines, Nigeria, and we're hoping to add energy efficiency, electric mobility, and other topics to that platform as well. So it's like an online platform, and then there's offline training, hands-on training as well. So those are some of the things that we're doing. Yeah.
So that was quite insightful, Stanley. So Based on your broad scope and presence of your organization, I mean, New Energy Nexus is operating in multiple emerging markets such as Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America. So accordingly, what lessons from other regions in terms of financing products are most relevant to South Asia's clean energy and climate innovation ecosystem?
Yeah, Kareem also touched upon this. I think the leverage isn't being done enough right now. So obviously, every government wants there to be a robust network of entrepreneurs, thriving startups in their own country, right? How with government budgets and how they are structured right now, it's not really unlocking that flow, which you need to unlock other resources, right? You need to unlock private sector investors, big time investors to get into this if it's going to grow, right? You got to unlock the larger corporate sector to really engage with these companies and work with them, right? So I think the way we see it, it's there's different ways to structure financial and also accelerator programs to be able to crowd in these types of resources, right? For example, we launched a very small pilot fund in Indonesia. Did the homework, did the due diligence, and once we shared that information to different private sector investors, we're able to catalyze 40 times the amount for every dollar that we invested, right? So going with that kind of a model, those catalytic funds are super important because they're a lot of times doing the work, they're de-risking by sharing technical due diligence, sharing know-how of how to evaluate such companies for the general private sector investors that usually don't want to take a look at smaller deals with smaller ticket sizes. So how do we unlock that amount of capital to come into the sector is the key. And there's, with small amounts of budgets, we're able to do a lot, but they have to be structured in the right ways as well.
That was very enlightening to hear, Stanley. Thank you for that. So now we'd like to turn to our last panelist for the session. So Sarah, from Invest to Innovate's perspective, it's the same question to you regarding what actions are you currently taking for the green transition and how to scale them further.
Thank you, Haris. I think our space is probably a little bit more similar to what Stanley just mentioned. Since we're an ecosystem builder, we sit in that middle space between founders, investors, and your traditional development actors. And our role in the green transition has really been about building the pipeline, trying to de-risk it, and then also the most challenging part is convening capital around it. I would say we're still in stage one, which is more about mapping and amplifying what this pipeline looks like. So through our research and ecosystem work, we've been trying to document where climate relevant businesses are actually emerging in Pakistan. So distributed solar, obviously Pakistan's had a solar revolution that's been widely reported on. But in addition to that, water, agri-resilience to some degree, circular economy, and then e-mobility have been like some of the spaces where we've been seeing a good mix of businesses that are building for impact, but also have commercial viability. We believe this evidence is very important because, as you mentioned in your opening note, Haris, Pakistan is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. It has suffered approximately $4 to $6 billion in climate related losses, economic losses just in 2025. However, unfortunately, this space is still somewhat seen as a niche, and through our work, we're trying to change that narrative or build upon that narrative and the urgency of this space. The second piece would be building capacity for these investable green ventures. So through our programs, we are now intentionally prioritizing founders who are solving climate and resource stress challenges, helping them with the basics that we see investors care about. So things like unit economics, having business models in place that can scale, having governance structures, and then one of the hardest pieces is having their impact measurement infrastructure lined up. Climate tech, we've seen in our work, is also locally misunderstood since it's so capex heavy. So a big part of our work is helping founders translate the impact that they're creating in this space into a language that investors actually recognize. And then lastly, the space is very fragmented. It's still very early stage in Pakistan. So connecting data to policy, founders to capital through different convenings, community initiatives, bringing investors, banks, and DFIs into these conversations so that we can also take a lot of these global and regional learnings and prevent some of those mistakes that have been made in other markets from happening in Pakistan. So these would be like three broad areas where we're becoming active.
Very intriguing to hear, Sarah. I mean, based in Pakistan, we're well aware of I2I's contributions to understanding the Pakistan startup ecosystem. So based on that, I mean, I'd appreciate if you can elaborate what key barriers you feel limit founders from building investable climate ventures, and where can intermediaries add the most value?
I think there's two pieces. One is earlier in the value chain. We still do not have any vertical. I think there's only one climate focused accelerator in the entire country, which by no measure does justice to the need that we have at the moment. So setting up more sophisticated technical assistance facilities, which helps these ventures become investment ready. I think that's a very, very important area that we need more intervention in. And we do see one-off projects here and there, but we've not seen this as a sustainable long-term asset class builder, which connects all parts of the value chain. So I think more climate-focused accelerators, NTA facilities, and the second thing, obviously, which everybody has already mentioned, is access to capital. You can do all the capacity building in the world, but if these ventures don't get access to the right amount of working capital, these things tend to fail very early on. And even within capital, I think more innovative structures around blended finance that help de-risk some of these ventures, I think those are quite crucial at this point.
Thank you for breaking that down so clearly, Sarah. I mean, particularly around the barriers and where you feel the support can be most catalytic. So overall, I'd like to thank all the panelists for sharing their perspective. It gives us a great foundation for the next part of our discussion. So it's clear that your organizations across the region, they're taking meaningful steps towards the green transition, whether through policy, investment, technical support, innovative financing, research. So before we deep dive into this discussion, I'd like to briefly reaffirm why this matters. So South and Central Asia face both immense opportunity and urgent challenges in climate smart investment. The region needs coordinated and action and cross-sector collaboration to scale solutions effectively. So with that in mind, Farva, I'd like to start with you. So from your vantage point, working with institutions and government partners, what enabling conditions do you feel are most critical to scale climate smart entrepreneurship across South Asia?
Yes, and thank you. This is a very interesting question, Haris. And I think this is a question I think a lot of organizations that are working on regional programming across different countries are thinking about, and especially when it comes to Asia. So I'd say without an enabling environment and that means capital as well, innovation remains kind of fragmented at places, because this is what we have seen through a lot of our programming that we thought there's a one program, Progressive Pakistan, that was launched, and then we had ecopreneurship, and then we had different kind of innovation models, and then we had climate and conflict, and then so many different streams coming under one umbrella and everything. However, it remains fragmented because the kind of targeted interventions we were doing, somehow they'll all end up at one kind of situation, and that's this region, I'd say, needs a policy alignment financing instruments that are very suitable to our own needs, and also more inclusive market access, to be very honest, because like at the Asia Foundation, we do have the privilege to actually compare it with the different region within the Asia as well, how things are working at one side and how things are working at the other side. And I'd say policy coherence and regulatory clarity, where we're working on ease of doing businesses and stuff like that, we need to bring all those stakeholders on one table to discuss, and we've already done that twice. But however, I think we need to still this dialogue needs to go further from there, where we need bigger actors to come and actually talk about some serious background. Because yes, we have innovation. Yes, we have great accelerator programs. We have a pipeline. We have people very interested in doing these things. However, when, as Sarah and Stanley said, when it comes to actually generating more funds for their program, somehow things most of the startups kind of fall through from there. And so access to early stage kind of flexible capital, stronger public private collaboration that we're working on. And I'd say at Pakistan is pretty much heading at that where level is this, the digital infrastructure and connectivity needs to really set the pace here as well. So and we're already working on a lot of inclusion and then gender kind of responsive ecosystem side of things. So I'd say that a lot of combination of these things will actually enable a better kind of atmosphere for our upcoming kind of growing businesses, startups, and small and medium enterprises, you name it.
Thank you for walking us through that, Farhan. I mean, it's quite interesting to hear that perspective. So just to add another dimension into this discussion, I'm going to bring in Kareem. So Kareem, based on IPS's regional experience and AKDN's institutional role, what strategies or partnerships you feel could scale climate smart entrepreneurship and de-risk early stage climate investments in South Asia?
Harris, I think it's really, really interesting, just even listening to our panelists right now, the approaches that we are taking. And I think if I look at from our regional experience, because we're kind of in a lucky position that we work across regions, and two things are very clear to me. The first one is when we talk about climate smart entrepreneurship, in my opinion, it will actually be driven by small and growing businesses. And this whole early stage risk that we talk about in our markets is actually real. So the question is how to share that risk and still demand the disciplines, because I think that's another thing that we kind of quite often don't think through. And in my opinion, there are some, probably 4 practical strategies that we see as promising in South Asia. The first one, and I think we've spoken about finance, but if I look at it's really the blended finance platforms that are designed around early stage climate ventures. We need catalysts or first loss capital, if I call it that way, from development partners, combine it with some commercial capital that comes in once the model is proven. For us as IPS or wider AKDN, we can act as that anchor investor, as a trusted convener for such platforms. The second, for me, is a much tighter partnership between accelerators. Like AP, we need to have AP, we need to have local financial institutions, and really impact investors. AP can prepare the ventures and provide what I call small tickets. However, the local banks can provide the working capital where it makes sense. And larger investors, even like as IPS, we can come in later in the stage and look at it and say, okay, what can we do and how can we help those startups to actually progress even further? When those roles are coordinated, the risk at each stage becomes a lot more manageable. And the third one, in my opinion, and probably most important where I see, is that technical assistance that really travels with capital. I think the early stage climate ventures often need support on technical choices, regulatory navigation, and that's probably, and especially what I've seen in Pakistan or I've seen in Central Asia, can be a challenge. So I think that regulatory navigation and really that business model design, it's not just about just the money. Money is important, but I think that technical piece really is critical. Pairing investments with hand-on support, either through our AKDN agencies or other specialist partners, helps to actually de-risk the proposition for both sides. And for me, the fourth one really is that knowledge share, or what I call regional knowledge sharing. Networks such as ND and institutions that like ours, which operate across East Africa, Central and South Asia, can really help move lessons and confidence across borders. Many of the challenges for climate smart founders in Pakistan looks familiar to those in Kenya or in Tajikistan. If we just share the data, the tools, and the case studies, everyone can really move faster, and investors will feel like that they're not alone in taking this risk. So I think it's really how we come together. And as I said earlier, I think the early stage risk in our markets is real, but it can be shared and managed if we design the right partnership. And I think partnership is probably the super critical thing from my perspective. So that's how I see it, Harris, in terms of what we do.
Thanks for that, Kareem. So you're very right in saying, I mean, knowledge sharing is very critical for that, and the right partnerships are truly essential. So, Stanley, I mean, we've heard about from Farwa what enabling conditions are required to scale climate smart entrepreneurship, and Kareem elaborated what strategies are needed to de-risk the early stage climate investments in South Asia. So, just building on that, I'd like to ask you, which gaps do you see in the South Asia climate tech pipeline that prevent investors from deploying capital at scale?
Yeah, to add on a bit to that, I mean, the situation is quite different for each market, right? The credit market, for example, in Pakistan, Bangladesh, they're not very well established, whereas, and also the maturity of different startup ecosystems differ, right, across various countries. We're seeing a lot of startups and new companies come out of India over the last 5 years or so, and it's quite competitive. So they're also looking for international markets to deploy in. So I think there's some larger financial and systemic things that need to happen with financial markets. But getting capital controls, getting money in internationally versus like getting money out after exits happen, that's also been a constraint. Yeah, so those are some of the gaps, but what I wanted to highlight is that South Asia and Southeast Asia as well is going to be the main market of opportunity from a climate technology deployment standpoint for the next decade, right? So it's about really highlighting those opportunities and helping people see what are the areas that we can have climate tech play a role to decarbonize specific industries, and we need to be very specific, like whether it's textiles, agriculture, electric mobility. Those will require different interventions, different financing partners, different policies. And so I think, even blanketing it as climate technology, it's we're going to need to deep dive if we want to make some impact in a specific industry. Yeah.
Thank you, Stanley, for the very insightful perspective. I mean, just speaking from a South Asia perspective, I mean, regulatory landscapes are quite unfragmented and quite underdeveloped. So based on that, I mean, no national circular economy policies exist within this region. There is yet to be developed or are in process of development. So this is a big issue. And you've rightly identified what the gaps that you feel are preventing investors from deploying the capital scale. Just building on that, Sarah, I'll be moving to you now. So what signals do you believe are you observing from investors, both local and global, regarding appetite for climate tech and sustainability-driven enterprises in Pakistan?
If you're talking specifically about Pakistan, Haris, I think the data clearly shows underinvestment. So one of the things that I2I does is we track deal flow within the startup ecosystem year on year, quarter on quarter. And one of the things that we've noticed is that climate tech has attracted only 2 to 3% of total startup venture funding in Pakistan between 2018 and 2024. And majority of that was concentrated in either electric mobility and agri-tech. So clearly there's a big gap that still needs to be filled. The second trend that we've noticed is that the average deal sizes in the climate space are much smaller than the broader ecosystem. So if we zoom out, I think the data shows that there's a lot of room to go in deeper and wider. The second thing is participation by the private sector is very low. As it's already been pointed out by other panelists, just to put some numbers, I think roughly 5% of the tracked climate finance in Pakistan has come from the domestic private sector. The majority has been either from DFIs or impact investors. So if you look at the numbers, we are still at the early stage of climate as a serious asset class. But then there are also positive signals like the Climate Ventures program, which was announced last year, which is a $50 million climate tech initiative backed by the Green Climate Fund. It has a $15 million first loss anchor for a dedicated climate venture fund. So that is a strong signal for the local economy. You also have the Acumen Climate Action Pakistan Fund, which targets 80 million for climate adaptation. And then we have players like yourself, GIZ, that are doing significant and important work. But I think from like wider participation from banks, from family offices, from corporates, there's still a long way to go. And I don't think that it's about interest. The friction or the resistance from more mainstream investors is mostly about like risk perception and how ready the pipeline is, which are the areas that we have started off with, because we believe that kind of removing misconceptions from there, having healthier pipelines that have commercial viability, having entry points for these mainstream investors can create the right momentum, which we believe that the country and the region will require over the next 5 years or the decade.
Thanks, Sarah. That was very insightful. So the signals that you believe that you're referring to, I mean, I asked in context particularly just for Pakistan, but do you believe overall for the South Asia region, does the same factors and the same insights into they apply there as well or not?
I think the rest of the region is far ahead in terms of both readiness and the kind of capital it's attracting. I do think the entire region faces similar risks when it comes to climate vulnerability. So in terms of viability, the same realities apply, but in terms of preparedness and how much financing the rest of the region has absorbed, I think Pakistan is catching up and will get there in the next couple of years.
Thanks, Sarah. That was quite insightful. So I'd like to thank all panelists for sharing those insights. It was incredibly valuable to hear your perspectives on this important topic. So building on what you've shared about your current actions, let's now take a step back and look at the bigger pictures, the opportunities and strategic priorities that could shape the South Asia climate innovation landscape moving forward. With that in mind, I have a final question for all of you. Looking ahead to the next decade, where do you see the greatest opportunities for South Asia to advance climate innovation, and what strategic focus will be critical to realize them? So Farva, I'd like to start with you.
All right, thank you. I'd say As we've already looking at the previous decades of where we are, and I think within the last 5 years, especially post COVID, things have changed a lot. Because we were going in kind of a very steady pace before COVID, but then COVID hit, and you have new kind of pandemic and disaster kind of considerations going forward, and working within the disaster kind of area almost a decade ago, the things were quite different when a lot of organizations started talking about climate resilience back then. But we need to have kind of and this is what we've learned from the previous decade, and that's going to help us with the next decade. What we're going to do is actually to offer kind of intelligent opportunities, and it doesn't need to be just we're going to experiment here, we're going to experiment there, and let's see what's going to happen and come out of it. But right now, as Sarah said, data is going to help us a lot into building kind of trajectories and kind of giving us the direction, and this is not a new space anymore. I think from the last decade, what it teaches us is to actually learn from it, and not blindly just go and do. And this happened a lot within even Asia Foundation work. We did a lot of separate kind of thinking, because at that time nobody knew what's actually going to happen. Is it a commercial interest, is a government interest, is a private, what kind of interest is going to get out of it. But I think only if the region invests in localized kind of solutions, and then actually go back to your youth and talk to them and engage them properly. And this is the part of some of our interventions as well, because we've given that space where we're talking about, are you do we need to work on climate tech? Do we need to work on more, or we need to create more spaces for women-led innovations, or is there a need for cross-border kind of collaboration? And what's going to come out of it if we really talking about this reason as well? So I'd say from the TAF perspective, I'd say climate smart kind of agriculture or the water management is is a very big kind of area where we're working on water, energy, food nexus. And then you also have to, one thing that we've learned from the disaster or pandemic is nature-based solution is something that we really need to focus. And I think Acadian has done a lot of work in there as well. And then if we talk about from the economic side of things, I think circular economy is something that we need to really talk more about with our youth and people as well. But however, there are so many different areas that I'd say that needs but different organization kind of have their own focuses for things as well. It can be health, it can be education, it can be other things, and it can be but it has to have a green aspect to it as well. Whatever kind of solutions, you need to be very mindful that it can be inclusive of climate resilience and actions building into that thing. And I think going forward, this would be the space and the biggest opportunity for us to actually think about how technology can anchor some of our work going forward as well, because we cannot just talk one, we're going to have to talk about the integrated approaches here.
That was very interesting to hear, Farva. So, I mean, you mentioned engaging with youth and empowering women as well. I mean, that's a very important aspect to it, right? I mean, AP itself. So one of our core mandates when we're trying to support businesses is to empower youth and women engagement. So it's very crucial in order to be in this climate tech startup ecosystem and the general startup ecosystem to be supporting them. So I'm going to move to the same question to Kareem now. So Kareem, if you could enlighten us regarding the greatest opportunities you feel in South Asia to advance the climate innovation, and what strategic focus to realize.
So my points are very similar to what Farwa just mentioned. And I think if I look at 10 years ahead, I really see three clusters of opportunities from a climate innovation perspective in South Asia. The first one, to some of our people, may sound surprising, but it's really the distributed and resilient energy. There's a huge need for a reliable, clean power for households, small businesses, and critical services. a lot of us take it for granted, but realistically, if I look at South Asia, this is still one of those areas that we need to think through. We've got open spaces for innovation in terms of distribution of or distributed solar, storage, energy efficiency, and even smarter grids that can really work in the mountainous regions of, Asia, and Pakistan is just one of those classic examples. And really the remote setting, if I can call it, as well as the dense urban ones. So energy is one area. The second one for me is very much around this, what I call climate smart food systems. And again, I'm focusing a lot on the mountains because that's where I spent quite a few months in recent times in the northern areas. And, when we talk about mountains of the north or even move to the plains or the coastal areas of South Asia, we are already feeling the climate stress when we talk about water and agriculture. There's a real opportunity in improved seeds and practices, cold chain food processing, close to farm gate, and better links between small producers and markets. Done well, it's both a climate story and a livelihood story, in my opinion. The third one is, again, it comes back to that water and resilience in our cities. The ultra heat, the flooding, the water scarcity are already visible. Solution in water management, nature-based approaches to reliance, better building practices will become increasingly inevitable over the coming decades. To realize these opportunities, I think there are three strategic focuses that are critical. One, it's building strong local institutions that can partner with entrepreneurs. That includes like investors like ourselves, whether we talk about AP as a platform or public authorities who are willing to work with innovation and not against it. And I think this is something that really is critical, is the willingness of the public authority in terms of what we're doing. Aligned to that really is, again, comes around the policy and the capital. Climate-focused ventures need a predictable regulation. You cannot have things changing every few minutes, and a mix of capital that is in the local currency. If policy, development funding, and private investments can all actually line up behind a few clear priorities, innovation will actually accelerate. And third for me is investing in people and skills. Climate innovation is not only about technology, it is about managers, it's about technicians, it's about community leaders who can design, operate, and maintain those solutions. If we do not invest in that talent base, capital will not translate into lasting impact. I'm realistic about the constraints in our market, but I'm also confident that if we stay focused on these priorities, South Asia can move from talking about green transition to building it through real enterprise on the ground. The opportunities are very real if we align around a few practical priorities, in my opinion. And that's really where I see it.
Thanks for that, Kareem. That was quite interesting and engaging to hear your perspective. Very intriguing. I mean, if I just speak from perspective of Pakistan, and just talking about entities that AP itself has worked with. The potential is vast. If I just talk about in particular entities that we work with, we have entities that are converting plastic waste into renewable building materials as well. So it just goes to speak, and this is just one entity. So the potential is great. So it really depends on us narrowing down on what the strategic focus is needed to realize such opportunities and to tap into such entities. So moving forward, I'll just ask the same question again. Stanley, over to you.
Yeah. I mean, Kareem already covered everything, so I probably don't need to say anything. But yeah, I agree with the comments in the chat. Like that was a very succinct articulation of all the major things that need to happen from New Energy Nexus and our perspective. Like diving into details, like I mentioned earlier, is what's important, right? Like how do we support decarbonizing the textile sector in Pakistan and Bangladesh versus enabling electric mobility, right, to finance itself, like via guarantee facilities so that lenders are more comfortable to lend and guarantee facilities for two and three wheelers now, for example, and we're learning the limits of what commercial lenders are willing to lend right now, and how do we increase that to a broader audience base, right? So those kind of things like are very specific to different industries, and I think looking forward to working with a lot of the organizations on this panel to try to figure that out. So I'll just end with that. Thanks, Harris.
Thanks, Stanley. Very interesting to hear your perspective also on this. So, Sarah, over to you. Same question.
I don't think I need to add anything further, but I just want to bring forth that if we look at individual markets, things might seem that they're very early and fragmented, which often happens when you're a local player. But it's very important to be on platforms like these because it helps you zoom out a little bit and look at things from a macro POV and a regional point of view. And when you do that, the climate and sustainability space is actually one that has a huge upside. So even if you look at the numbers, and I think, Harit, you mentioned them in your opening note as well, but just to highlight that for the audience once again, according to IFC, South Asia can actually unlock $3.4 trillion in climate smart investment opportunities by 2030. So once again, it kind of reminds you of the potential of the region. And if you look at the stuff that has done well, so for instance, the solar revolution that we witnessed not just in Pakistan, but also in India, Bangladesh, and Nepal. If you go deeper, one thing that kind of comes forth is that they're not just like mitigation stories, but they're actually stories of communities stepping up and innovating and thinking of indigenous solutions, which then have like a multiplier impact on like the entire region. And if we take the same approach to other sectors that are very relevant to this region, like agriculture, building climate smart cities, I think there's big potential that has to be unlocked. Same thing with like EV adoption in the region. Once again, that's something that's a very local, very indigenous success story, and there's a lot to learn and replicate in other sectors. So those are things that excite me in terms of opportunity.
Thanks for that, Sarah. So it was very insightful. I mean, hearing every panelist opinion and perspectives on it ended up being a very well-rounded discussion around this topic. So just to add, is just a quick question for all of you. I'd appreciate if you could just take 1 to 2 minutes perhaps to be answering this. Is there anything in particular that you'd be advising for aspiring entrepreneurs that want to start in this sector? So Farwa, I'd like to start off with you for this.
Thank you so much. And this is, as you said, is a simple question, but it's not really, is it? I mean, when giving an advice to the new startups, I'd say, I do think whenever we talk to the youth is like, they need to research more. They need to their thinking need to transition into that. They need to do more evidence-based the design needs to be like, more factual than like, just desires. And like, there's one thing that I want to, like, this is my wish to work, that like, in this particular area, I want to work with the reduction of like, let's say plastic, like, within my community or something like that. But like, proposing a solution, or like, kind of like, working with different kind of people, you need to have like factual details as well. Like, you need to know what are you like, what are your opportunities, what kind of actors, kind of a market, like, kind of a research. And it doesn't mean that you need a lot of resources to do that. It's just like, it needs like, more of your time. And probably at that kind of like, age, you can like, afford to do that. So whenever and most of the times, like, even when we kind of like, provide these youth with opportunities and to network and like, meeting new people and investors and everybody, and that's where they kind of like, fail to get like, kind of attract that kind of finances sometimes. Because if you have like a good pitch, if you have like, a kind of evidence-based approach towards things, and also if I'd say like, going forward, if you have like, social enterprise model into your head as well, like, whatever like, working on, is it like, a green, is it like, what kind of a unique like, kind of characteristic that is like that you will be, or your business or idea will be bringing to the table as well. That one thing that I'd say, like, if you want to work on, like, please work with the data, please work with like, kind of factual information, and not just like, and like, I mean, the wishing for something is great, because that's like, how you start for with like something, but also like, kind of sport it with like, scientific like, background of things as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Vera. That was great to hear. Kareem, over to you. Same question.
Yeah, look, I think from my perspective, the first thing I would say is be obsessed with the problem, not just the pitch. Do not fall in love with that idea. Fall in love with the problem you're trying to solve. And I think, when you talk about youth, it's around understanding, and quite often they're fixated. And I think we need to say to them, you need to talk to your customer every week. If you're not willing to do that, then is this where you want to go? And the other thing is really respecting those numbers early. You do not need a perfect model, but you must know your units of, performance, how you're going to measure it, what are you going to do. Build that governance and discipline from day one, because I think quite often, and as I said right at the very beginning, if you turn around and say that, green is just a buzzword, I think we need to remember that it has to be that core of your mandate. Otherwise, if you put it as a side thing and just as a word, it's not going to. So that discipline, that governance is really, really important. And I think the other advice that I would give is choose your partners or investors carefully, because quite often what happens is we just focus on the money elements when it comes to entrepreneurship. And I think we need to look at partners or investors who are actually going to give me more than money. It's understanding those values. It's trusting the partners and really using that partnership in terms of growing, rather than having a wrong partner who can actually destroy your business quite faster than what can happen. And the last thing that I would say that I really would suggest to the youth entrepreneurs is about looking after themselves and their integrity, because entrepreneurship is really, really demanding. And here I'm talking about any type. I'm not even talking just from a climate perspective. We need to really think through that you will be tired, you will make mistakes, you will be tempted to cut corners, but protect your health, protect your reputation. And really, in the markets that we are talking about, trust is probably one of those most valuable assets. And once you lose it, it's really hard to rebuild. So I know I've kind of digressed, but I think this is something that the youth entrepreneurs have to be aware and be able to drive that in their mind from day one.
Thanks for that, Kareem. It's interesting to hear your perspective on this. So, Stanley, over to you. Same question.
Yeah, I mean, I think as usual, Kareem and some of the other panelists have covered a lot of the key points. But for us and what we do, I encourage a lot of the entrepreneurs to reach out to us and see how we can help you guys, right? Like we're always running programs. We are intentionally connecting different companies with their overseas counterparts, right, who have tried many of the similar business models, technologies, things like that. And there's a lot that they can learn before embarking on a that kind of a journey. So yeah, like just leverage the resources that are available. Like today, there's a lot more resources with all these entrepreneurship support organizations, eye to eye, like what all of these panelists are doing compared to 10 years ago, right? So leverage all these resources so that you have the best chance of success. And yeah, looking forward to engaging with more potential entrepreneurs because that's what we do. Thanks, Harris.
Thanks, Stanley. So, thanks for sharing that with us. Sarah, over to you.
I think the advice for climate entrepreneurs is not hugely different from what we would say to any entrepreneur. The first one being like understanding the problem and not falling in love with the solution or the technology, which is a trap that we do often see early stage founders fall into. And if you speak about Pakistan or South Asia at large, there is no shortage of climate related problems. You could look at energy, water, agriculture, waste, heat management, and there is, actual economic pain points to be solved. So truly understand your problem and then migrate towards building a solution. Another thing that's already been mentioned, but I think it's extremely important, is when you are in a space like climate and sustainability or any impact related space, but looking to set it up as a economic or a commercially viable venture, it's very important to understand your unit economics. It's very important to have them on handy. It's important to measure them, communicate them clearly, because there is a very sweet balance that these ventures need to have in terms of their contribution to environment and impact at large, but also to make a business case for the commercial sustainability of their ventures. And this becomes very relevant when you go on and try to raise capital. You have to understand what you're asking for, what the returns against those are, and then also being well educated on the kind of financing stack that's available to you as a climate enterprise. It's not always a standard solution. There's very different kinds of financing that are out there, ranging from grants to project financing, revenue or results-based financing, and you'll only be able to benefit from it once you understand the full spectrum that's available to you. Lastly, one thing that we are also working on very actively is having the right impact metrics for your business. Starting to have them in place very early on, figuring out how to track that sustainably through your business's life cycle. I think that becomes extremely important, especially when you're in this space. So, and I think partnerships also, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Leaning into local, regional, and national networks, partnering with other entrepreneurs who might have walked this path before, subject matter experts, ecosystem players. I think that can really help speed up the learning curve, and we have to lean into the community that's available to us if we are to move faster.
Thank you, Sarah. That was very insightful to hear your perspective as well on this. So before we move towards conclusion of this session, there are a few questions that are being asked by the participants in the session. So Parva, this is a question particularly for you. So you mentioned inclusive market access and flexible capital. So they're asking you to elaborate a bit more on that.
So this is something that we've been kind of working on. What is inclusive market access is actually when whenever there's a competition or there's we open the cohort or something like that, so most of the time, and it's I understand where this comes from is the ideas get selected, or the products that get selected, or the startup that gets selected, they have a very they already have a track record of their success somehow, and that speaks for it. If you want to invest or kind of give a seed award money, you'd rather give it to a solution that's already, and that actually kind of naturally excludes that early stage ideation, or sometimes that innovation. And most of the time what I've seen as well is when you don't know how to do the market access, the conventional kind of market research and everything like that, and then and those kind of things naturally then the women-led entrepreneurs who don't have that kind of resources, sitting in a rural kind of environment and everything like that, somehow sometimes that inclusive market research that says is kind of this is something that we are working on, that no matter where you are, or the thing is, and we can open that sometimes through these competitions or different kind of and you can have before the final events will actually have, or final competition would happen, what we do is for the whole month or two, you can prepare them, you can give them those resources to just even the play field for everyone. I mean, if someone already have their prototype ready, that's easy to get into any system. But if it's an early age idea that can only happen within the competition, it's kind of that space that can be leveled by the investors or competitors, or commercial kind of investors, things like that. When we talk about kind of flexible, that's the other question, right? Flexible capital.
Yes.
Yeah. So what we have seen so far, and that includes our own systems as well. When we talk about mainstream financing structures, those are often risk averse, most of the time short term. And when we're talking about the development sector, kind of things as well. And there's also there's this whole thing where we say the rigid systems in place as well. So this is exactly the space that we're working on these days, to actually come up that impact investments sometimes can look different from there, the traditional kind of investing into that thing, because it is a bit different. It's more holistic in a way, and we can actually create that space where you can actually where we can talk about impact catalyst funds or something like that. And I think in this region this needs to happen a lot. But yeah, definitely this is the area that we're talking about, that can be a flexible capital that ensures that finances kind of reaches those people or areas where private investment or the similar kind of investment least likely to go, when it comes to that.
Thanks for that, Farwa. So, we have a couple of questions actually in Q&A, but given the time that we're left with, I think we'll be going about 5 minutes over the assigned time. But I think this is an interesting question that's been asked. So, Kareem, I'll be asking you this question. So, a participant has basically stated that the energy market is highly politicized, and that in Nepal, they're facing unprecedented political bottlenecks in energy markets despite ever-growing demand. So how can they unlock this challenge? So I think it's just maybe not just focusing on Nepal, just focusing on the Central and South Asian region. I mean, this is a very interesting question. If you can share your perspective on this.
Look, I think, Harris, obviously we're talking here about a real challenge when it comes to power. And people get worried that we don't have. And to be honest, if we had power in all our geographies, that would automatically help us to actually grow in whatever business we want to go into. So power is a necessity. It's not an optional thing. So that's, I think, the first point I would make. The second point I would make is a lot of the governments have actually tried to address these issues if I look at just even the northern Pakistan situation today, what's happening in Hunza, and there's another kind of question on the panel that has been asked similar around why have we taken on this water and power department. It's not something that we do as entrepreneurs, but we have had to help the government because they've tried a lot of things. And that's why we've got into like a 30-year agreement that we're not just going to walk away. But again, it's not linked to what we are talking here today about entrepreneurship. I think we are there as AKDN helping overall from not only living conditions, but more importantly, for them to get into their businesses of whatever it may be. So I'm kind of trying to respond to two different questions in a way that it is not kind of something that we do lightheartedly, but it is a significant investment of time, effort, and it is long term to leave the place in a far better position. So as AKDN today, we provide over 1,000 megawatts of power across East Africa and Central Asia. And this is something that we will continue doing and helping, but running government agencies is not our core business. But this is something that the government has requested us to do.
Well, it's very interesting to hear. I mean, the kind of impact that AKDN is having clearly. So overall, I'd like to thank all the panelists for a very engaging and very thoughtful discussion. The ideas and experience you've shared today will help guide the next steps for climate innovation and investment in South Asia. I hope to see that we can look forward to realizing these opportunities and turning them into action. So overall, I also like to thank Aspen Network for Development Entrepreneurs, Andy, basically, so for bringing us together today and for their tireless work in enabling conversations and initiatives that drive the real impact in the entrepreneur ecosystem. So Sucharita, over to you, and thank you once again to the panelists, to all the participants, and to Andy.
Thanks, right back to you. And Harris, just to reiterate, I hope that we're able to bring you together, not just today, but on an ongoing basis, as Stanley said. And you heard some of the other panelists talk about being able to leverage the community. I think this is the community. So I do look forward to having all of you continue to stay in touch. Our role here is to try and make sure that that happens and that it's more than just staying in touch. So please do write to us with specific requests. We had some of you ask us here on chat, not enough time. We're still available. But I think more importantly, do join us for more of the sessions over the next 3 days. With that, thank you very, very much once again to all of you, and see you on the other side.
Thank you
Thanks,
for that, Sucharita.
everyone.